I'm Chloe, an architect. I had planned every little detail of my wedding, from the flowers to the songs. I'd always dreamed of this day being like a scene from a romance book where love wins. Jack, my fiancé, was standing at the altar with a nervous smile. He's an engineer, very logical, unlike me, who is more creative. I thought we balanced each other out well. I was so happy to start this new part of life with him. But when our eyes met, I noticed he seemed distant, almost troubled. I thought it was just nerves. I was wrong. As I walked towards Jack, his mom Linda whispered something to her neighbor, sizing me up with narrowed eyes. When she saw me looking, she forced a smile and said I looked beautiful, but it didn't seem genuine. The ceremony went on, and when the pastor asked if Jack would take me as his wife, there was a long, painful pause before he finally said, "I do." But his eyes didn't have the warm feeling I'd always associated with those words. As we exchanged rings, Linda stood up and took a photo, loudly saying we needed to capture the moment because weddings are just the beginning of a lifelong commitment. The irony wasn't lost on me. It felt more like a warning than a blessing. During the reception, Linda came over to me while I was talking to some old college friends. "Oh, Chloe," she said in a sweet tone, "your dress is lovely, though a bit unconventional for a wedding. But then again, you've always been rebellious, haven't you?" I looked at her, forcing a smile. "Well, I believe weddings are about celebrating love, so why stick to tradition?" I tried to keep things light. Before Linda could reply, Jack stepped in, telling his mom to leave me alone because it's our day. I felt a momentary relief, thinking he was finally supporting me. But then he added, "Besides, there's no point arguing about dresses and traditions now, is there?" His words carried a sense of resignation that shouldn't have been there on what was supposed to be our happiest day. I looked around the room, hoping to find someone who could reassure me that everything was normal, that it was just wedding stress making everyone act strange. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The warning signs were too obvious to ignore. As we prepared for our first dance, Jack held me at arm's length. Our bodies moved to the music, but it felt like our souls were miles apart. The song, meant to be a celebration of our love, seemed to mock me instead. "So, Mrs. Chloe, ready for forever?" Jack asked as the music faded away, his words echoing in the space between us. If forever was going to be like today, I thought, then I didn't know. But all I said was, "Yes, ready as I'll ever be," praying that the dark cloud hanging over us would lift and that this bizarre start would just be a blip in our forever. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a saga that would test not just our marriage, but the very essence of who I was seemed to be under attack. As everyone raised their glasses to toast our new beginning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already ended. After the wedding, we returned to my cozy 3-bedroom house, bought with years of hard work. It was meant to be our safe haven, a fresh start for a lifetime together. Little did I know, those walls would soon feel like a prison, a stage for domestic battles. The invasion started subtly. Linda, who lived just 15 minutes away, began dropping by uninvited. She never missed a chance to criticize me, my cooking, the arrangement of the living room, even the color of the bathroom tiles. "Why can't you make anything other than this tasteless pasta?" she scoffed during one visit. Jack would weakly intervene, but it felt like he did it more for show than genuine concern. Linda's visits became more frequent, almost like clockwork, each one marking her territory with a snide comment. But the biggest shock came when she arrived one afternoon with suitcases and an air of entitlement that could suffocate anyone within a mile radius. "I'll be living with you now," she declared, pushing past me to claim my cozy reading nook as her own. My heart sank. I looked at Jack, silently pleading for him to say something to stop this. This was our home, our decisions to make together. "Jack, can I talk to you for a moment?" I managed to pull him aside, my voice trembling. "We should have discussed this before any decision was made." He looked at me, his eyes void of the love and support I desperately craved. "I thought I had seen just a few months ago. Mom's getting older, Chloe. She shouldn't be alone. She should be with family," he said, emphasizing the word family as if I weren't considered part of it. So I'm not family? Is that what you're saying? I questioned, feeling the hot sting of tears starting to form. You know that's not what I mean, he retorted, clearly exasperated. But Mom has done a lot for me, and I owe her this much. What about what we owe each other? We just got married, Jack. This is supposed to be our time to grow as a couple, not play house with your mom. But my arguments fell on deaf ears. The decision was made just like that. My opinion, my feelings, my home, none of it seemed to matter. And so Linda moved in, turning the love nest I had envisioned into a battlefield of egos, tensions, and outright hostility. Every room in the house felt heavier, suffocated by her presence. I could no longer find a quiet corner to read, a peaceful moment to reflect, or even a loving glance from the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. That's how I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage or my home. I was fighting for my identity, my dignity, and my peace of mind. All the while, a single thought echoed through my head. How did it come to this? How did my life, my home, my choices become secondary to the whims of someone else? My reading nook was now a shrine to Linda's possessions, my kitchen a stage for her criticisms, and my husband, well, he was a stranger siding with the enemy, and all of this was just the beginning. If I thought life was hard before, it was nothing compared to the living nightmare that followed. The atmosphere in the house grew denser each day, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. What made it even worse was the undeniable 2 blue lines on the pregnancy test I held in my trembling hands. I had always imagined sharing the news of my first pregnancy as a moment of joy, an occasion to be cherished. But as I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, eyes red from restrained tears, I realized this milestone had turned into a millstone around my neck. When I told Jack about the pregnancy, his response was as lackluster as ever. Well, that's something, he mumbled before quickly changing the topic to discuss a home improvement project his mother had suggested. It was Linda, of course, who took control of my pregnancy as though it were her divine mission. She began dictating my diet, my activities, and even the hospital where I would deliver, but her intrusion didn't stop at unsolicited advice. She managed to turn my pregnancy into another battleground for her psychological warfare. "You're eating again," she would say, her eyes darting towards the modest sandwich I'd made for myself. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy? This is doctor recommended." "Linda," I'd reply, mustering all the patience I had left, "doctors these days know what they're talking about. Back in my time, we knew how to handle pregnancies." And so it continued. As the weeks went by, my energy waned, but Linda's expectations soared. She turned my home into her personal palace, ordering me to clean, cook, and cater to her needs as if I were a servant rather than a daughter-in-law, and a pregnant one at that. "Chloe, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" She'd yell from her self-assigned throne, my old reading nook where she'd spend hours scrolling through her phone or watching daytime TV. "I've been feeling really tired today, Linda. The doctor advised me to take it easy," I'd say, my voice tinged with desperation. "Tired? Pregnancy isn't an illness, you know." Jack once again remained conspicuously silent, his compliance deafening. The tension reached a breaking point during another heated dinner discussion, where Linda decided to critique my choice of baby names. "That's a ridiculous name for a child. You might as well pin a kick me sign on his back for his entire school life." Linda sneered. "Enough is enough, Linda. This is my child, and I have a say in how to raise him or her," I snapped, my patience finally depleted. "Oh, so now you're talking back to me?" Linda's eyes flared, her voice escalating. Jack intervened, but not in the way I had hoped. "Chloe, you're being emotional. Mom's just giving her opinion," he said. I looked at him, then at Linda, and then at the house that had turned into a nightmare. I felt trapped, humiliated, and utterly alone. I could barely recognize the woman staring back at me in the reflection of my tarnished wedding ring, a woman who was slowly losing everything she had once valued: her home, her dignity, and most devastatingly, her will to fight. And that's when it happened. the ultimate betrayal. Linda, filled with venomous triumph, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you can't handle a simple family discussion, maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family." And Jack, he said nothing. His silence spoke volumes, cutting deeper than any words ever could. It was in that moment I realized that my nightmare wasn't unfolding. It had already unfolded, and I was living in it. My life had become an unrecognizable maze of shattered hopes and suppressed sobs. I moved like a zombie through the rooms that no longer felt like my home. The baby inside me seemed to be the only living part of my existence, and I clung to that tiny spark of life as my last shred of hope. But even that was threatened. One cold evening marked my breaking point. We were having another one of those god-awful family dinners, where tension cut through the air like a knife. I had spent hours on my feet cooking a meal that I knew Linda would find fault with, no matter how perfect it was. Each critique was a jab, each scoff a slap. I knew another one was coming, and I braced myself for it. But when it finally came, it was worse than anything she'd said before. "You really think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household? What are you going to do with a baby?" Linda sneered. My heart sank into my stomach, each word a stab at my already fragile self-esteem. Before I could say anything, Jack joined in, sealing my emotional fate. "Mom has a point, Chloe. You need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was it, the final straw. A bolt of anger mixed with a lifetime's worth of resentment and humiliation surged through me. "Step it up? Step it up?" I shouted, surprising even myself with the intensity of my voice. "I am carrying our child for months, managing our house, and putting up with relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you tell me to step it up." Both Jack and Linda looked stunned, but I was on a roll, a volcano finally erupting after years of suppression. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice cracking. "I won't raise my child in an environment where their mother is treated like dirt. If you two are what family means, then I don't want any part of it." And with that, I left the table, leaving them both in speechless disbelief. I packed a small bag and headed for the door, my trembling hands struggling to turn the doorknob. That's when Linda decided to deliver her ultimate blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Jack's house, not yours." I turned around, my eyes locking onto hers. "Actually, Linda, this is my house. I bought it, and I have every right to say who stays and who leaves." "Chloe, don't do this. Let's talk about it," Jack pleaded, finally realizing the gravity of what was happening. "There's nothing left to talk about," I said, tears streaming down my face. With that, I stepped out into the frigid night air. No coat, no plan, just an overwhelming urge to escape. As the door shut behind me, it felt like a closing chapter, the final act of a tragedy that had stretched on for too long. I began to walk, each step a painful reminder of the life I was leaving behind. I had no idea where I was going, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my destiny. But the cost of my newfound freedom was agonizingly high. The icy wind pierced through my thin clothes as I trudged along the deserted streets. I had walked for what felt like miles, lost in a haze of emotional and physical exhaustion. I was almost there, almost at my parents' house, a sanctuary from the hell my life had become, when my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement. I stumbled, twisting my ankle painfully as I fell to the ground. The pain was sharp, but it couldn't match the ache in my heart. Limping and teary-eyed, I finally made it to my parents' doorstep. The look of horror on their faces as they opened the door told me everything I needed to know. My breaking point had come, a long overdue fracture in a life burdened with far too many cracks. And as they rushed me to the hospital, I knew something had to change. I couldn't go back, not to the house, not to Jack, and certainly not to the woman I had become. Hospital rooms have a peculiar way of forcing reality upon you. As I lay there, my sprained ankle elevated, and my body checked for any complications due to my fall, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. My parents were there, their faces etched with concern and quiet fury over what had transpired. They'd always suspected that my marriage was far from ideal, but the depths of its dysfunction had finally been laid bare. "Close, sweetheart. What are you going to do now?" My mom finally broke the silence, her voice heavy with worry. "I don't know, Mom. But what I do know is that I can't go back to that life. Not now, not ever," I replied, my own voice firmer than I expected. My dad, who had been pacing the room, finally spoke. "Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, but you need to think about your future and the future of your child." I nodded. I had been doing nothing but thinking, my mind a labyrinth of potential scenarios, each one fraught with uncertainty but also tinged with the promise of freedom. It was then that my phone buzzed. A text from Jack. "Chloe, where are you? We need to talk." Ignoring the text, I switched off my phone. Whatever he had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done talking. My actions would speak louder than his words ever could. My first move was a call to a family lawyer, a decisive step in putting an end to my disastrous marriage. With my parents by my side, we discussed divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was something chillingly clinical about dissecting a failed relationship in legal terms, but it also instilled in me a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, making choices that prioritized my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Jack and Linda were served divorce papers and a notice of eviction from the house, my house. The lawyer also included a clause for hefty child support payments and financial compensation for the emotional distress I had endured. It felt drastic, but it was necessary. It was my first step towards reclaiming my life. The darkness had consumed me, and towards a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of something better. The courtroom had that sterile, cold air that seems exclusive to places where lives can change in an instant. My lawyer sat next to me, a stack of papers in front of her, radiating confidence. My parents were behind me, their moral support palpable across the room. Jack sat with a look of defeated bewilderment, his mother Linda beside him, her face a mask of indignant disbelief. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Morrison entered the room. The divorce proceeding was a whirlwind of legalese, a barrage of facts and accusations laid bare for the court to dissect. As the evidence of Linda's abusive behavior and Jack's neglect was presented, I watched their faces contort, perhaps truly seeing themselves for the first time through the eyes of the law and through my eyes. The judge turned to Linda. "Mrs. Davis, you stand accused of emotional abuse and harassment. The evidence is overwhelming. How do you plead?" Your Honor, this is all taken out of context. I was only looking out for my son's well-being," Linda stammered, her voice lacking its usual arrogance. "It appears your definition of well-being is quite twisted," Judge Morrison retorted, clearly unimpressed. Finally, the judge rendered her verdict. "The court hereby grants Chloe Davis a full divorce from Jack Davis. Custody of the unborn child will be given to Chloe. Jack Davis, you are required to pay child support as determined by the state. And Mrs. Linda Davis, considering the extensive evidence of your emotional abuse and harassment, I'm fining you $100,000 for your actions." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as the gavel came down, but it was a bittersweet relief. My marriage had ended not with a bang, but with a quiet rustling of legal papers. I was free, but at a cost I never could have imagined when I said, "I do." As we left the courtroom, Jack approached me, a lost look in his eyes. "Chloe, I'm so sorry. I never thought we'd end up here." I stared at him, seeing the man I had once thought I would spend my life with, and all I felt was a void where love used to be. "I didn't think so either, Jack, but here we are. It's too late for sorry now," I said, turning my back on him and walking away. Linda tried to make eye contact as I passed her, perhaps seeking some form of acknowledgement or forgiveness, but I gave her none. She had taken so much had been taken from me, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing she still mattered. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun seemed a little brighter, the world a bit more colorful. It was as if I was seeing everything through new eyes, not clouded by constant anxiety and emotional distress. It was the beginning of a new chapter for me, one written on my own terms. My mother hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it, Chloe. You're free, and it's all thanks to you and Dad." "I couldn't have gone through this without your support," I replied, grateful beyond words. "We'll always be here for you," Dad said, joining in the group hug. That night, I sat alone in my house, the house that was now truly mine, and felt a sense of peace settle over me. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, the only expectations I had to live up to were my own. I was still apprehensive about the challenges that lay ahead. After all, I was going to be a single mother with all the responsibilities that entailed. But as I touched my belly, feeling the gentle stirrings of my unborn child, I knew we would be okay. My painful journey had led me to this reckoning, and while scars remained, they were now a part of a story of survival, not defeat. I was ready for whatever came next, not because I had to be, but because I chose to be. And that made all the difference. My mother-in-law criticizes me a lot because I prefer to keep to myself at home. She calls me lazy and says I should leave. But isn't she the one who eats and sleeps all day without doing anything? She should be the one to go. I'm Kelly, and I've recently become addicted to potato chips while watching TV. Now, at 39, I've gained extra weight because I haven't been active and ate too much. 2 years ago, I started working from home, which I thought was great because I could sleep in without commuting. But my mother-in-law keeps telling me to get ready for work, even though I don't need to leave the house. She's staying with us without asking. Last year, with the pandemic, we stopped visiting her, and suddenly she moved in with us to be close to her grandchild. Today, my mother-in-law is moving in with us, even though both my husband and I didn't want it. We have a 5-year-old daughter, and we stopped visiting them to keep her safe from getting sick. I didn't like the visit from my mother-in-law, who came from a busier city than ours, leaving my father-in-law behind at their home. Living with my mother-in-law is really annoying, and there's no benefit to it. I've tried to politely ask her to go back, but she ignores us completely. No matter how many times we say we want her to leave, she accuses us of being cold to older people or not caring about family. On the first day she moved in, there was a big argument, and instead of going home, she tried to lock herself in the upstairs of our house. When I blocked her from entering a room, she got angry and upset our child. We were too tired from work and taking care of our child to stand up to her, so we ended up living with her. I tried to explain to her that I work from home now because of changes in my company due to the pandemic. But she doesn't believe me, saying that people in construction can't work from home. I'm actually in the administration department, and I can work on a computer from home. She doesn't trust young people and thinks we don't understand technology. My mother-in-law keeps insisting that there's no such thing as a convenient job like working from home. No matter how much I explain, she won't listen. She's really good at justifying herself and exhausting everyone around her with lectures. To avoid arguments before work, I usually just agree with whatever she says. But the problem doesn't go away. The next day, and every day after, my mother-in-law started calling me a freeloader because I work from home while my husband works outside. She says I just sit around having fun on the computer. She criticizes me constantly, even though I take care of the house, make breakfast, clean, and do the shopping. Ironically, she's the one who does nothing but eat the meals I prepare, snacks I buy, and lounges around the house all day. Despite my complaints, she won't leave. One day, during an online meeting, she burst into my room demanding sweets. I had to explain I was working, but she accused me of pretending. Living with her is really tough. My mother-in-law keeps complaining about little things like having bread for breakfast 2 days in a row, and calls me stupid for not being more attentive. Yet, she hasn't contributed anything to our living expenses since moving in. To be honest, I pay the $1,800 monthly mortgage for this house that's in my name. When my husband and I got married, he faced an unreasonable job transfer and was threatened with a demotion when he declined. So he made the tough decision to quit. At the time, I was financially stable working at a larger construction company, so I took out the mortgage in my name. Now, my husband contributes to our expenses, and we share everything as a couple. I'm definitely not the freeloader my mother-in-law claims I am. One day, she insisted I go buy sweets, and when I locked her out of the room to work, she banged on the door and disrupted my meeting. It was so bad that my husband, who's usually careful with his words, cursed and yelled at her, saying enough is enough. Even he had reached his limit. My mother-in-law is assertive with the attitude that she's the parent here, but when my husband gets really angry, she becomes weak. If my husband could control his anger better, maybe she would have left. After he physically escorted her to the front door, she quieted down a bit. Eventually, my husband had to physically remove her from our home, but she forcefully pushed her way back into the house. My husband and I tried to stop her, but we ended up with bruises on our arms and legs. It seems like my mother-in-law is determined not to leave without a fight. She hates being told what to do, so even if we kick her out, she might just come back. We had no idea how to deal with her. Although she had been quiet for a while, one day she started again. She told me she met a neighbor during her walk who mentioned that their wife works from home sometimes but also goes to the office. My mother-in-law used this to claim that I was lying about working from home. She interrupted me at work to prove her point. I tried to explain that my company allows me to work fully remotely, especially since we have a child. But she kept accusing me of lying and being childish. She laughed triumphantly, saying people are shocked to hear that someone works from home like I do. She doesn't believe remote work like mine exists. Despite my attempts to politely ask her to leave so I could focus, she ignored me. She accused us of causing the situation because we stopped visiting her. Her ranting intensified, and I couldn't concentrate on my work. I really need to finish this program for my job, but dealing with her is making it difficult. She demanded that I listen to her and forcefully turned off my laptop, causing me to lose about an hour's worth of work. Then, she insulted me, calling me a freeloader and telling me to get out of the house. In her anger, she even threw the computer at me, breaking the monitor. Luckily, it was my personal laptop and not a company one, but it was still upsetting. I couldn't understand why she called me a freeloader when she's the one who does as she pleases without contributing anything to the household. No one welcomed her presence, and it was frustrating. After that incident, I decided not to argue with her anymore. Since my computer was broken, I had to go into the office to work and reduce contact with her. She made sarcastic remarks, but I ignored them. When my husband heard what happened, he was furious and determined to kick her out. But just kicking her out wouldn't satisfy me. I decided to endure a little longer until she went on a trip with a friend. During that time, I planned to give her a taste of her own medicine. A week later, my mother-in-law returned from her trip in a good mood. But she found me in the room she had been using. She demanded I unlock the door, but I stood my ground, telling her that this was my house and I had been using the room for years. So I told my mother-in-law firmly that she had to leave. She was furious and kicked the door, but I didn't open it. My daughter's voice came from behind the door, asking Grandma to handle things. It seems my husband was also there, advising her not to end up like Grandma. My husband gave my mother-in-law 3 choices. Leave now, think about it, and then leave, or leave and never come back. Despite her anger, my daughter's words seemed to have an impact, and my mother-in-law's voice became weak. She argued back, saying she did nothing wrong, but my husband pointed out how she only thought about herself. Frustrated, I decided to open the door. My mother-in-law was shocked by what she saw inside. She asked where Jung was, and I jokingly said I threw him out with the trash. Jung turned out to be her favorite Korean idol. She had collected CDs and merchandise related to him and had even attended events he participated in. Most of her suitcase was filled with Jung items. When she decorated the room with his posters and photos, I replaced everything with posters of the Backstreet Boys and their merchandise and even changed the curtains. She was upset that everything was different, and we argued about the changes, but it seems my prank caught her off guard and changed her mood. So I decided to play a prank by replacing everything in the room with items that were age appropriate. I changed the posters to ones of the Backstreet Boys, replaced the curtains, and even swapped out her favorite Joe items with different decorations. When my mother-in-law saw the changes, she was shocked and upset. She asked about her belongings, and I teased her about the cost of the new items, saying that each poster was expensive and even showing off a designer carpet and a Homer Simpson stuffed toy I bought. I explained that if I were really a freeloader, I wouldn't have the money to buy all these things. This seemed to deflate her, and she didn't argue back. Then, I showed her the outfit she would wear the next day: a pair of stylish pants and a t-shirt with freeloader written on it. My mother-in-law was overwhelmed by everything and started to tear up. Eventually, she decided to leave, pulling out her suitcase from the trip and exiting our house. My husband and daughter supported my decision, and she finally left. But I hadn't expected to be this effective later. I contacted my in-laws and said, if you want the June goods back, please pay for the past living expenses. And the computer. Did I really throw the goods away? Of course, not. That would be a crime. Even if it's family, I just pretended to have thrown them away to break her spirit. In fact, all of my mother-in-law's personal belongings were hidden in my husband's room. Relieved, my mother-in-law immediately accepted my demands. For John's sake, she transferred the money for the past living expenses and a new computer to our account. However, the money came from her husband's retirement funds, which were supposed to be saved for any future needs. Moreover, the money for the trip and her fan activities for Joe also came from those retirement funds. Originally, my father-in-law was bitter about my mother-in-law's uninvited stay at our house and furious about the reckless spending of his retirement funds. Naturally, they ended up divorcing after a huge fight. Since the family home originally belonged to my father-in-law, my mother-in-law was kicked out, probably hoping to rely on us. My mother-in-law found herself without support after my husband declared he wouldn't take care of her after such a flashy showdown with me. She resigned herself to her fate and didn't seek help. In the end, she moved in with her estranged sister, but was reportedly quite tormented by her niece's good riddance. Meanwhile, our household has become even livelier with our daughter starting elementary school. Lately, she's been learning to make sandwiches at school recreations, and she insists on serving her creations to us every day, so our dinners are full of sandwiches. Well, someday she'll make the best sandwiches for someone important to her, so for now, we're happy to be her practice subjects. My husband, who hadn't had much chance for recognition since changing jobs finally last year thanks to a review of the company's evaluation system, he was able to get a promotion. It's tough when you join a company from the good old days without a solid evaluation system. Hopefully times will keep changing for the easier, thanks to that our lives have gained a bit more comfort. Well, we can't say very luxurious due to the high cost of living, but as long as my husband is here and my daughter and we can eat together as a family, I think we're living a very happy life. What you consider happiness is up to the individual, right? Fortunately, I can keep working happily, and except for my weight, I don't have any health worries. When our daughter said I want to take care of a rescued cat, we went to a cat adoption event and our family grew. Now it's 3 people and 3 pets living together. How could this life not be happy these days? I think I'm living the happiest days compared to anyone.